Hello and welcome back to Mark's House and Garden UK. Just look at all these amazing apples on this apple tree. It's absolutely laden with them. This year has been a really good year for apples, and these are cooking apples. And that gives me a bit of a problem. I can't give them away because all my neighbours have trees like this and they're similarly laden. I don't mind some of them going on the ground for the wildlife, but I really would like to do something with these. So I'm going to make a pork and apple slice with apple sauce. Now this is a really easy recipe to make, and it looks delicious and it looks quite impressive, and it's just the sort of thing you want to be making on these cold, dark, autumnal evenings. First thing, let me run you through the ingredients. Now we'll type all this up in the description box below this video, but I'll run over it now anyway. So I've got some dried thyme, a roll of puff pastry which is already made, my 3 apples from the garden, 400 grams of lean pork mince, there's 500 there, I won't be using all of it, 50 ml of double cream or creme fraiche, salt and pepper for seasoning, 2 pieces of white bread out of the freezer, you can use stale bread, some whole grain mustard, some sugar for the apple sauce. You also need some cling film and some greaseproof and a foil lined baking tray with a rack, an egg and an onion. And you will also need a little bit of vegetable oil, and the first thing I'm going to do is cut the onion up and fry it off in a frying pan, and whilst that's happening I'm going to put the frozen toast in the toaster, and this needs lightly toasting. That is going to form our breadcrumbs. Let it toast, then let it cool down. Now the onion does not have to be finely chopped, but once it's been fried you must allow it to cool down before you use it. Now chop the toasted bread into very small pieces. I am not going to blitz this in a blender. Small pieces will be perfectly good. They're almost like croutons rather than breadcrumbs, and they will do the job. Once they've been chopped up into small pieces, leave them on a plate to dry out. Now I got 3 apples, 2 are for the sauce and 1 is for the pork and apple slice. So the next thing I'm going to do is get the applesauce on the go. Peel the 2 apples, chop them into chunks, put them in a saucepan with some water and a teaspoon of sugar, and just let them simmer. So that's 2 cooking apples roughly cut, and I'm going to add a teaspoon of sugar just to sweeten it, and a small splash of water, not too much, just enough to start the steaming process. You put the lid on, you put them on a ring on a medium heat for about 30 to 45 minutes until they start to fall. Now I've not cut and peeled the 3rd apple yet because they do tend to start going brown, as you can see here, as soon as you cook them. So get this on the heat, get it stewed. That can also be enjoyed as a dessert, stewed apples. Now these onions are nicely sweated, they're translucent and they're starting to go a little bit brown, so they're ready, but they must be allowed to cool down before we go on to the next stage. The breadcrumbs are nice and dry and crunchy. Now if you wanted to do a gluten-free version of this recipe, you can get panko breadcrumbs which don't contain gluten, and you can get a gluten-free version of puff pastry, so you can do exactly the same as what I'm doing and it will be gluten-free. So the next thing to do is to make the centre of the pork and apple slice, which is going to be like a big fat sausage with apple running through the middle of it, and I'll show you exactly how I'm going to do that right now. Firstly, let's combine the ingredients in a mixing bowl. Now I don't need all of this pork, only about 4/5 of it, so we'll take that off and we shall put the big part of it into the mixing bowl. break it up a bit, then add the breadcrumbs or the croutons and the cold onions. Now we want 2 dessert spoons of whole grain mustard, 1, 2, and we need 50 ml of double cream or creme fraiche, which is pretty much all of that. Mix it all together until it's all evenly mixed together. And at this stage, of course, we can also add some seasoning. So I'm going with a dessert spoon of dried thyme, quite a bit of pepper. I like mine to be peppery, and some sea salt. Not too much salt. And then give it all a good mix. So we're about to make the big fat sausage that's stuffed with apple. So at this stage you can peel the third apple and cut it up into quite small chunks. There's the third apple finely chopped. Don't worry if it starts to go brown, it doesn't matter, it's going to be inside the slice. But you must remove all the core and all the peel because they will be chewy and crunchy in the final recipe. We don't want that. So that's nicely chopped. Now, if there's a tricky bit to this, it's making this sausage, which I'm about to do next. But follow my technique and you should find it easy. So, on a chopping board, roll out your puff pastry. And this will be a size guide for when we start to make the sausage. So roll it out completely, right up until the very end. Be gentle with this end, because if you're a little bit too assertive with it, it can crack. Now the next thing to do is to take some cling film and completely cover that pastry. Overlap the cling film quite a bit at both ends, and you'll see why in a minute. Now that puff pastry is protected from the filling. So far, so good. Chopping board, puff pastry, cling film, overlapped at each end. The next thing to do is to spoon the pork sausage mixture up the centre. Now, my tip here is don't try and overfill it. Don't be afraid of taking some out, because if you try and overfill it, rolling the pastry over in a moment is going to be even more difficult. So I have a nice even layer of the filling. Perhaps take a bit from here and put it in that gap there. And I'm just going to make a little dent up the centre, like that. And look, I've got a strip all the way around the outside for when I want to roll it. Now, we will add this apple in a nice neat little line up the centre, just like this. This will reduce down in the cooking process and it will become mushy. And we want it to be nice and appley, so get as much of that in there as you possibly can, all the way up to both ends, and then gently push it down into the mixture. There's the stuffing, here's the cling film. Now the next thing we have to do is roll it up and twist the ends into a sausage and put it in the fridge. This is the tricky bit, I have to say. So gently take the cling film on either side and start to lift it and form it. Don't panic if it starts to go wrong, it's not the end of the world, you can always put it right again. It usually goes wrong with me, and I'm making a video, so just squeeze it gently together like that until we've got a nice sausage shape, and then we can overlap each end of the cling film. You can see there, that's starting to come together, and the more control you've got of it, the easier it is to work. Now I've got complete control over that because that is inside a nice cling film tube and I can handle it. The next thing is get hold of the ends, lift it up and remove the pastry. And you can see that's coming together nicely with a bit of overlap in the cling film and a loose bit at either end. Now, for my own peace of mind at this stage, I put an extra bit of film in just over this seam here, just for security, and you'll see why in a moment. So that's double wrapped. Now gently manipulate this mixture from either end back into the centre, because naturally it will have moved, it will have migrated up. And get hold of it like this and roll it. And as you roll it, the ends twist and it becomes more and more compact, and you can see there's a nice juicy fat sausage shape that now has to go into the fridge for half an hour to cool down. Whilst that's cooling down in the fridge, it will also be firming up, and I can now tidy up and have a cup of tea. So that's nicely chilled now. It's a lot firmer and easy to handle. I've got a piece of grease-proof paper about the same size as a pastry, and this is where we kind of assemble the slice. So again, the pastry is going to be rolled out onto this piece of greaseproof, and then it's going to be placed on there to cook, and I'll tell you why I'm doing that in a moment, but for now let's just get the sausage roll, or the big fat sausage, inside the pastry. Now at this point in time it's worth doing a bit of a check just to make sure that the pastry will go all the way around, and if it doesn't, you might need to squeeze it and elongate a little bit, and you may even end up cutting a little bit of the meat off, because it's got to fit inside that pastry and it's got to be sealed. So I'm going to probably end up cutting a little bit more, and this is what I was saying before, less is more. Don't try and overfill this. We need a nice overlap on that pastry. Right, that's about right now. So what we need to do next is get it out of this cling film onto that pastry. And there's my extra bit of cling film, which was the security net. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to very carefully unfold it and then roll it like that. Very gently shuffle it off the cling film onto the pastry, and at this stage I can see that there's too much, so I shall get a knife and I shall just remove some. I won't go to waste. I'll make a couple of burgers out of that. And now it is a simple matter of using the greaseproof to roll like almost like a Swiss roll in a way. There we go. I've rolled it and there's a seam underneath it, and that's exactly where the seam should be. I just need to seal these ends using a little bit of egg wash, so I shall paint some inside and then squash them down. And if you've got enough spare, it's a good idea to fold it underneath. Now in the past when I've done this, I've just put it in the bottom of the baking tin, and there's a lot of moisture and fat in there, and it leaks out and it sits in its own juices, and I don't want that. I want it to be nice and crispy and the puff pastry to puff up. So I'm going to transfer it onto that rack. So I shall put this grease proof, fold it in half like that, so that any juices can run off into the underneath and it can sit in a nice dry environment. And the final thing I will do before I put that in the oven is just give it a good paint with the remaining egg yolk, and that will give it a nice colour. And then a few scores just along the top with a sharp knife. That is now going in the preheated fan oven on the middle shelf at 180 fan for about 45 minutes. Now, it doesn't harm to check every now and then just to make sure it's not burning, and you can rotate it halfway through. I will see you in a moment when that's cooked. So that's actually 55 minutes later. Are you ready for the big reveal? I hope you would agree that that looks rather delicious. I'm going to transfer it to my chopping board, take it to the table and slice it up and try a piece. But the best way to slice these is with a very good quality bread knife. Just go through it. And then use a palette knife to lift a beautiful segment of pork and apple slice over to your plate. And down there in the cross section you can see the pork and you can see the apple. I hope it tastes as wonderful as it looks. Let's give it a go. It's really good, absolutely delicious. I'll get quite a few days of pleasure out of that. It would serve for dinner. You can cool it down and eat it for several days cold. I hope you've enjoyed that, me making a pork and apple slice with leftover apples. I'll put the instructions in the description box below this video. It's not a gardening video, it's not a DIY video. It's a cooking video, but I am claiming it as a gardening video because it was apples out of my garden. I'll see you soon for some more pork and apple slice adventures. Bye for now.